What's up, everybody? Welcome to Move the Sticks. DJ Buck, and we're joined by our good friend Tom Telesco, longtime general manager in the National Football League. Tom, thanks for taking the time. How you doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, guys.
I appreciate you doing this, man. This is the first question I just come out right out the gate. What the heck are you up to? What are you doing?
I got a lot of time on my hands right now, DJ. But no, I'm just trying to fill the void. You know, I'm a football guy at heart, so doing things like this. Doing a little bit of Sirius XM radio with NFL radio and volunteering at the local high school, just trying to fill the football void.
You got to see the Sea Kings. He got the CDM. He got the Sea Kings on. I know they throw it all over the yard there.
We're the complete opposite. We're the complete opposite of Granada Hills. Complete opposite.
They are throwing it all over the yard and doing their stuff.
Have you ever played them, Buck?
No, they did different class, different way.
No, but when you were at maybe your previous stop,
Notre Dame. No, when I was at Notre Dame, we never had a chance to see him. But at the time, they had the quarterback. I think they had Garbers, and they had John
both
Humphreys.
Garbers, yeah.
And I think John Humphreys, they had a wide receiver that he might have had 120 something receptions because they throw it. DJ, literally, they throw it every down. It's a 4 hour. It's a 4 hour commitment. It's a 4 hour commitment when you play them.
We're in Orange County. We got quarterbacks and receivers all over the place down here. We have a hard time finding offensive and defensive linemen, but we can throw it.
That's fantastic. There's luxury car dealers in Orange County. There's insurance salesmen, and there's private quarterback coaches. Those are the three largest industries in Orange County. One of the things I want to hit you on, because we were talking about this the other day, about some of the stuff, the comments from Robert Saleh last week, and how that ended up being kind of a kerfuffle, which seemed like much ado about nothing when the way me and Buck were looking at it, because this has been part of football for so long in terms of trying to get signals. And we even mentioned it before you and I had a conversation off the air. Buck was like, "Oh, the Colts were the reputation as being the absolute best at being able to do this." And Howard Mudd got a lot of the credit, but it was a lot more that went into that, wasn't there, Tom?
Yeah, first of all, when I saw that comment, it's like, what are we doing here? Because this is 2025. We have coach to player communications in helmets. So there really shouldn't be a whole lot of signaling unless you're in a no huddle situation.
I think he was talking about shifts. So in other words, like if we were to shift and then they were to signal to change coverage or change, what they were doing with the front. That's why they were trying to motion and shift to see if they could get them to give a hand signal to change a check or change a call.
Yeah, maybe. And that's probably the case. But yeah, going back to, I guess it'd be pre 2008 because Spygate was 2007. That could be a different show. So when I was a pro scout, I'm on the road doing advances and, I'm there to acquire information. I don't want to call, stealing signals, but, you're doing it legally with your eyes, with binoculars, with pen and paper. And it was funny because NFL defensive coordinators, they were notorious for not changing their signals, not using multiple signalers on the sidelines. You don't know who's live and who's a dummy, and they never blocked their signal. So the coordinator would walk out to the white of the sideline if they're going to run over Saw Sam and Will blitz cover two, and it would literally be over Saw two. And it was like, you're not even trying. Remember the old Roadrunner Dynamite where he's going like this?
Yeah.
Like, both backers are blitzing. Like it was not hard. But you mentioned Howard Mudd. So I go out to San Diego to scout the Chargers, and Wade Phillips was the defensive coordinator. And Wade was on the sidelines with his strength coach next to him, and they were both signaling. And I couldn't tell who was live, who was the dummy. So I came back with nothing because you can't get. You try and guess the signals, you're screwed.
Yeah.
So I come back with nothing, and Howard Mudd just blew up at me. But he only yelled at those who he loved. But I didn't want to guess, and so we had nothing. But it's not hard to conceal these signals, but you have to at least try. But yeah, if you're going to shift in motion and you're looking for hand signals, that's been going on for probably since the 40s and 50s.
So for real quick, Buck, just for the execution of something like this, right? So I saw our pro guys doing the same stuff when I was in Baltimore. But then my question is that something that then gets transferred to the coaching staff? Does that go direct to player? What's the channel of information?
Yeah, it would go to the coaching staff first. Like with us, it was, the offensive line coach was so good at it. He did it way before I was even there when he was back with the Seahawks. But yeah, we would go back. I would log in every down, distance, and yard line, and I would just put the signal on there. And then I'd go down to Howard's office, and I'd have to kind of act out the signals. just so he could actually see what everything was. So I'd act him out in front of Howard. Howard would take that information, and then Howard, on game day, Howard would stand in a certain spot on the sideline. He'd watch that defensive coordinator, and you're not going to get every single play, but if you can get a blitz, that was big, or at least get the coverage. But the blitz was the big thing, and he'd look right down at the defensive coordinator, and if he saw something, he would tell Tom Moore on the headset, and then we went no huddle, so you could send into the quarterback, and away you go. But everybody did it then. Now you did it legally. You did it with your eyes and pen and pencil, and you go back and you log it. Now videotaping, that's a whole different. That's not right, and that's illegal, obviously, by the NFL standards and in college. But it just doesn't happen much anymore because of the player-to-coach communication system.
So it's two things. One, Tom knows this because when I went to Buffalo in the 90s, like they were at the frontier of the no huddle movement. Yeah, and part of the advantages of going fast is you force the defense to play vanilla. And so very early in the game, whatever they were in, they stayed in.
Yes.
Down the line, when I played defense, what we would do, and it's funny, right? Because Tom is talking about stealing the signals. One of the things that defensive players were taught to do is, signal the check. So when I look at the tape, I know that everyone got the information. So if it was something where they moved formation and we changed to cover 3 and everyone patted their head, well, it doesn't take a brain surgeon to be able to figure out, every time we move, they pat their heads. What's the coverage that they go to? Oh, this means 3. And that is part of it because defensive coordinators were so scared of the communication not being relayed to the players that they had us confirm the signs. So as much as they talk about the offensive guys stealing it, a lot of it is on the defensive coaches not trusting that their players could verbally communicate or know what they were supposed to do without someone basically double checking the work.
Yeah, and just change the signal every now and then.
Yeah.
This doesn't have to be cover 3 for 17 weeks.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. Well, I think they've gotten a little bit better at it. And like you said, once you have that speaker in your headset for the quarterback, it eliminated a lot of that stuff. I want to get into some team building stuff, Tom. And this is where, having someone who's built playoff rosters, a bunch of them during your time, we're looking at all these injuries at the quarterback position so far this year. We've seen a bunch, including high profile guys like Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson just got nicked up, and Brock Purdy's been hurt, and on and on and on and on. And I think that the common refrain you hear is, well, how the heck did we not invest more money in a backup quarterback? There's a supply issue, then there's also the cost. But how did you guys, when you were scrimmaging that in terms of placing the value? Because I know the old stories. I've heard Tom Moore from his mouth what his thoughts were on the backup quarterback behind Peyton. But just the teams that you've run, what was your philosophy on that investment, and what was the way you went about it?
Well, I know it was when I was with the Colts, when Peyton Manning was there and Bill Poing was the GM, and then when I'm with the Chargers for a long time, we had Phillip Rivers. It was hard to get veteran backup quarterbacks that had talent to come because they knew they're never going to play. But certainly as a GM, you look at your cap and your cash, and you have all these things you want to work on. And if you have a franchise quarterback, you'd like to use money in other places and not at the backup quarterback spot. But in reality, it's one of the most important spots. You have to budget for it. And last year, I think more than half the starting quarterbacks went out with an injury and missed games. That's a lot. And I think as quarterbacks become more mobile, as they play longer into their careers, which means their injury, they have high risk, or higher odds of getting injured, certainly how offensive line is played. You have to invest in a backup quarterback, whether it's in free agency, whether it's in the draft, maybe drafting a quarterback higher than you usually would when you already have one. But it's something you have to budget for. It's kind of like paying for insurance. The more you pay in premiums, the more coverage you're going to get. And what you don't want to do is have a playoff caliber team, lose your starting quarterback, and then your season's done. But like you said, the supply is also the problem because there aren't 64 quality starting and quality high backup quarterbacks. So you got to try and find them, and they're hard.
Tom, so like playing upon that, it's one thing to acquire a backup quarterback. It's another thing to have him getting ready. So I always hear starting quarterbacks talk about they want to dominate. They want to have all the reps because that's how they get ready. Well, if there are 100 reps in practice, how do you allocate reps to the backup to get him ready? And how do you develop the young quarterback if they don't get enough reps? Like, how do you manage both of those? How do you serve both of those interests?
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of that development is in the offseason because you're right. Just a lot of starting quarterbacks, they want every snap in the regular season, and it's hard to not give it to them. You only have so much time on the practice field. I mean, most teams, we're not out there for 3 or 4 hours. We're out there for 2 hours, 2 hours and 15 minutes. You only have so many snaps. And Phillip Rivers, he wants every snap. Peyton Manning wants every snap. So for the backup quarterback, that's why preparation, football intelligence is so huge, because a lot of your development is going to have to be without the ball in your hands. It's going to have to be in the meeting room, knowing the playbook, getting mental reps at practice. Because you're also, a lot of times you're running the scout team, which at least you get some physical work, but you're not getting the same mental work. So you're not running the same offense. So a lot goes into that position, and a lot is very important. Your quarterback coach, coordinator, but certainly your quarterback coach, because that's really his job, is to develop your number 2 quarterback and your number 3 if you have a nice young developmental quarterback.
Yeah, no doubt. The famous line, by the way, I referenced earlier, which was when Tom Moore was asked at one point in time, why don't you give your backup quarterback any reps? Peyton gets all the reps every single week. You don't give the backup any reps. He goes, look, we all know if Peyton Manning gets hurt, we're screwed. Why would we want to practice being screwed? That was like one of the lines on there of like, hey, the whole thing's over. If this guy goes down, like there's no saving it. There's one of one when it comes to him. Which gets me to the next thing, Tom. You've had a chance to build teams around a veteran quarterback. You've also had a chance to build teams around a young quarterback. What goes into the thought process of how you surround those two guys, and how is it different?
It's definitely different just based on, honestly, number one, how much money they're making. So obviously, if you have a veteran quarterback on a big contract, your team's going to be made up a little bit differently. It's going to have to be younger. It's going to have more, not rookie players, but players on rookie contracts. And then on offense, like I just felt like if you have a franchise quarterback, whether he's younger or older, he needs to have people around him. He needs to have weapons. That's the way the culture built. And that's the way the Chargers are building it right now. You got to have an offensive line. You got to have weapons to throw to. And sometimes that may take away some talent on defense, which means you got to have a top flight defensive coordinator. But I think with a lot of these younger quarterbacks that we're seeing right now, the franchise quarterbacks, it's so important to either have a tight end that can work the middle of the field, separate and get open, or a young or veteran receiver that is a top flight route runner, and he's going to be where he's supposed to be when he's supposed to be there 100% of the time, kind of the way Keenan Allen has been for Justin Herbert. To have that security blanket for a young quarterback that you're building with, that he knows this is where I can go on 3rd and 8. And then as your quarterback gets older, like I said, your team has to change. When we were with the Chargers, we knew even before we signed Justin Herbert to the big contract, year or two before, we knew we're going to start transitioning our team to a little bit younger in certain areas. That's just the way you're going to have to do it as you pay your quarterback. So how you build it is going to have to change depending on how much you're paying your quarterback. And that's the way everybody goes about it.
Tom, it's funny when you talk about the team building process around the quarterback and those things. I want to ask you about when you make the decision to pay the quarterback, the young quarterback, and people kind of get into year 4 and you're making that decision whether to pick up the option and those things. In your mind, how many games does it take to make a decision on a young quarterback? Because I've heard Brian Billick would talk about 30 to 32 games. And then when you make that decision, how uneasy is it to commit to it when you may not have seen just enough to make that final decision?
That's a great question. I think it's more subjective. I mean, I could be flippant and say Justin Herbert's first drive against the Kansas City Chiefs, we knew at that point. but we did. I mean, you can laugh about it, but we didn't know at that point, but it was certainly a great start. That's a good question. I think, we do rely on a lot of data to help us make decisions, but there is some of it that you get to a certain point of a young quarterback's career, you just know, like, hey, this is a guy we know we can win with. This is a guy who we want to build around. How long does that take? I mean, quite honestly, with Justin Herbert, is probably after the first year, which isn't a lot of play time, but you can see, because you're around these guys every day. A big part of the guy you're going to invest in is how is he Monday through Saturday in the building? What type of leader is he? What's his character like? What's his football intelligence like? Like you scout all that and you evaluate it in the draft process, but until you really have them every single day, you don't really know. So you get a full year with a player, you get a pretty good feel for them off the field as far as what they bring to the team, because they're going to be the face of your franchise. And then once you decide in your head, like, hey, this is the guy, that's when you have to start adjusting how you build the roster. You can't wait to, once you sign them to the big contract, now say, all right, we have to now, with our salary cap, we're going to have to let some older veterans go and, have some more rookie contracts. So you got to start that at least 2 years beforehand. So the quicker the better, but obviously the larger body of work makes you make the right decision. But I think at the quarterback spot, you kind of know it when you see it. And, with him, you certainly did.
Yeah, I was ready to just walk down the row and just tell the Spanos family, you go ahead and pay him after he came in that first drive against Kansas City. I was still trying to figure out how he got on the field. Money and I were sitting there calling the game, going, Justin Herbert's we didn't know what had happened with Tyrod Taylor, so we were trying to figure that thing out on the go.
I didn't even see it. I was on the phone with the bench figuring out like what happened to Tyrod Taylor.
Yeah,
because everything happened so quickly, and then what he had going on, as a general manager, like you're concerned about your players, want to make sure he's okay. And then I look up and I see Jessup running into the end zone. Like, well, that's great. We're 7-0, but that's just part of being a GM. You're working on some other things at the same time the game's going on.
Yeah, that's wild, man. All right, Tom, I'm going to hit you on two real quick here because these are things that we've talked about a lot over the years, and I want to get your opinion as someone who's run a club. Fact or fiction here. We always say that a team takes on the identity of their leaders, and that whether that's the head coach, general manager, quarterback, however you want to look at it. Do you buy into that fact or fiction?
Fact, 100%. And that's definitely something we talked about, when you're interviewing head coaches. The identity of your team is directly reflected in your head coach, especially the character of your head coach. And to me, the most important part of team building is having an identity on both sides of the ball. It's hard to get to. You can see the teams that have been consistent winners in this league. When you put the tape on what you're going to get on both sides of the ball, even as the players change, because players come in and out, and coaches change too. But to have an identity on both sides of the ball is so important, and that comes from that coach.
Then the last one I'll ask you just quickly. Do you need to, and I guess I'll just put it to you like this. Do you need to draft toughness or can you develop toughness?
Ooh. Oh boy. I want to say draft. You either have it or you don't, in my mind. And if you had the toughness, you had it going all the way back to Pop Warner, to high school, to college. And I'm sure there's some things you can do in your program at the pro level to maybe make sure you bring it out of the player. But I'd like to hear your guys' point on that, or opinions on that too. It's, to me, either have it or you don't. But I'd be curious to hear you guys on that one too.
I believe you have to have it in you, but I think it can be enhanced with peer pressure. And the reason why I say that is, as someone who went from offense to defense in Kansas City, when I walked into the building with Marty Schottenheimer, and there was an expectation that everybody had to do that, there's a pressure that you have like, well, I don't want to be the weak link. And when you have those things, if you're competitive, if the person is competitive, they can raise it up a notch. I would never be a trained killer, but I knew when you're in the huddle with Dale Carter and James Hasty and Derek Thomas, like, I can't be the one that is the weak link because they're going to look at me. So I do believe they have to have it, but I think your environment, if it's always talked about, discussed, physicality, toughness, how we get after it, I do believe it becomes an organizational thing. And the guys that come in, when they walk through those doors, they know, hey, this is how we go about doing our business.
I would say from the Baltimore stuff, which was, probably the toughest team, or the team that was viewed as the toughest team in the league for that period of time, it was still 9 out of 10 of the guys we brought in were tough. Like they came in with that toughness, and then we would make exceptions, one guy here, one guy there, and that was the famous Rex line in the draft room where we said we have enough ants we can carry a cockroach. Like, it's kind of like you can have some one-offs of these, but I also think it was because that culture could pull that out of one or two players. You just couldn't bring in a wave of them and let that group outnumber the tough group. But then I go from there to Cleveland, and I was like, we don't have a bus driver here. We don't have somebody to steer that. So you have to avoid those players. It made it scouting much harder when you're a team that doesn't already have that tough identity, right? Because if you want to become a tough team, Tom, you've got to, those guys are off your board. Like, you can't bring those guys into that environment because it's going to get worse.
Yeah, it's a filter. If you want to be a fast football team, don't draft slow players. This isn't rocket science. You want to be a tough football team, don't bring in guys who either don't love football or play soft. I mean, yeah, maybe you can improve them a little bit, but Buck, I do agree with you on that. Like, once you have the tough players, you can still have the culture, make sure you bring it out of them. And far as being the weak link, what you don't want to have is on Monday when they show the clip to everybody in the room, and all of a sudden you're dunking your head and you're missing a tackle on the perimeter, and everybody sees it. You don't want to be that guy.
Yeah, but you know what? That also speaks to having a level of accountability in the building. So when we talk about toughness, I don't think you have a tough team without having different levels of accountability. That's coach to player, but also player to player. Yep. Because where it gets tough, and Tom, from those old teams in Buffalo, the worst thing, DJ, is not having to answer to a coach, but having to answer to Bruce Smith and Darryl Talley and those guys. Like having to walk into those huddles with those players looking at you sideways, that's when you have it going. And I would say that I think is Buffalo, that experience was unusual because we didn't have pads on much. We didn't do a whole lot of hitting and contact, but that was a very physical team. Maybe because it was an older team, but it was a weird environment being young and seeing that play out. Like, we don't have pads on. We're practicing for 90 minutes and we're a team that's going to 4 straight Super Bowls. How is this possible? But that's what it was.
But can you imagine you're in the huddle with Darryl Talley? I mean, Darryl Talley, that's one intimidating guy. So you better make every tackle behind him.
That's fantastic. God, those are fun teams, man.
Yeah.
And just the Cowboys came along at the wrong time, or they've got a couple Super Bowls. Tom, I want to ask you about 2 players here, and we can kind of wrap this one up here in just a moment. But you've drafted 2 players with unique ability in I would say over the last 10 to 15 years. I don't know that we've seen more than one Derwin James, and I don't know that we've seen more than one Brock Bowers. I know it's early on Bowers, but when you look at those 2 players, what did you see on them on college tape, and how confident were you that all the incredible stuff they did at that level was gonna happen for them at the next level?
Yeah, well, with Derwin James, and you probably remember this, his last year at Florida State, they did not have a good team. Mm-hmm. I remember going to see Florida State at Boston College, and it just wasn't your normal Florida State team as far as playing with energy, playing with physicality. And they had some talent, but just wasn't the same. But yet he was the guy that just kept showing up. And once we drafted him, once you get to know him, you can see why. Like his football character is second to none. I've never been around anybody like him. That's such a great teammate, leader, smile on his face, but holds people accountable and holds people accountable the right way. And then all of his physical attributes of size and speed, and he can play almost any position on the field. And what was nice too in those situations, because Florida State had a bad year. You have to kind of filter through. Our scouts were, with Kevin Kelly being the director, you get very few consensus players. You don't always want consensus players, but everybody was right down the road, right down where they need to be with him as far as a player. And then just the versatility, he can do so much. You can use him so many different ways. And then with Brock Bowers, just, a little bit different situation for us with the Raiders. It's just, we didn't have enough talent across the board, and they had a lot of regime changes. They had missed on a lot of 1st-round draft picks. And I know going in, I just want to make sure, whoever we take with this first pick, it needs to have the highest odds of success, because we have to start adding some talent to this team, and we can't miss on a player. And obviously, we could have used a quarterback at that point. But we're also looking at it do we have the infrastructure right now to really support, a franchise quarterback? Our offensive line was in flux. We didn't have any weapons on offense. At defense, we had some pieces, but not enough. And with Brock Bowers, nobody is a can't miss. There's no guarantees, but he was about as high odds a player as I've ever seen, with how he played the game, with his skill set, and then his off the field, his work ethic, his intangibles. So, to be a great player in this league, you got to have both. You got to have the talent level, the speed, the explosion, the strength, the size, but you got to have the intangibles, the work ethic, the preparation, the love of the game. And if you can find those 2, and it's easier said than done. Sometimes we think we found it and it doesn't happen. But those 2 guys had it to the first degree.
What's funny, Tom, is having known Derwin since he was 16, 17 years old. I just remember being around him. I coached the team that he was on, and I've never seen someone so passionate about playing a game. And he had come back. He was already at Florida State, and he's helping us out at a Nike event. And that passion was just ridiculous. And I want to ask you, when you talk about the football character, I think it's really important for our listeners to understand what do you mean when it comes to football character? What exactly are the things that y'all are? We talk about moral character, being a good person, but when it comes to character related to football, what are things that define it?
It's so funny because we talk about football character all the time, but trying to actually evaluate it, it's really hard. It's so subjective. But because we talk about, hey, passion for the game, love for the game. Well, it's easy to say, but how do you really tell? Now with Derwin, his style of play, if you watch the tape, you can kind of see like the passion he plays with. But then after you meet him, it's even more so. He was actually pretty easy. But you talk about a passion to play, a passion to get better as a player. Because at this level, the college level, a lot of these kids, they can produce because they're so much more talented than the players they're playing against. They're playing against a lot of players who won't play NFL football. You get to this level, everybody's good. So you have to keep improving. So you have to have that, we would call it drive and desire, a drive and desire to be great. And that's to keep improving at this level. But evaluating that at the college level, it's just really hard. And that's, we interview players, and interviews were important, but to me, they weren't the most important thing. The most important thing to me was the information that our scouts would get at the school from the sources they have that know that player for an extended amount of time, maybe recruited them and had them for 2 or 3 years in college. And then if our scout had a good relationship with that source, that was really good, unbiased as much as you can without an agenda information, who saw the player on a day-to-day basis, that to me was much more important. That information was more important to me than a combine interview that we felt was a great combine interview. It's good that it happened, and it's a good, first piece of the puzzle, but you can get fooled in interviews too in 15, 20 minutes, or even if you bring a guy in for a day in a 30 visit. So the information we receive from the school, from people who know the players, they give us the best picture of the player was the most important part for me.
Yeah, I think that term we've been using too is care factor, like just having a real high care factor and trying to figure out that information is the tricky part. Tom, I think you're almost in these interviews, and they're so condensed and they're so formatted and everybody's been so trained. I almost thought even just when we have guys on conversationally, I think you learn more asking them about their teammates than you do asking about themselves.
That's a good point. And with the interview, certainly at the combine where you have 20 minutes, you have to be very strategic with how you want to handle it, to try and pull out some answers. And because again, a lot of it's scripted. A lot of it, a player may be very guarded. He's in a room with a lot of people he doesn't know. I just think we have too many people in the room to really get good information. I used to try and cut it down, but yeah, you got to be strategic with how you want to ask the questions just to get some good information out. And actually, it was just great to ask them about their teammates because we can learn what they think of their teammates. And sometimes they're honest, sometimes they're not. But try and find some untraditional ways just to get a feel for the personality of the player was really important.
Oh, it's fantastic, man. This has been fun, Tom. So much fun that we're going to spread this out to another episode so we can pick your brain a little bit on some big games coming up this weekend. So that'll be on tomorrow's episode. Appreciate everybody hanging with us today. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on Move the Sticks.